Hello and welcome to Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. I am Colred. Thank you for joining me. In today's video, I will be covering everything about the new permanent fusion for the mythical champion, Lady Mikage. And I'm going to talk about what goes into this fusion, and if you're a free-to-play player, we'll talk about how long you can expect to wait before being able to complete this fusion. I'm also going to do a review of Lady Mikage herself, so if you have questions about any of those topics, this is the video for you. Let's get started. Just a quick reminder, I live stream here on YouTube 2 days a week. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, I have my Takeover Tuesday event where I give away free account takeovers to members of my Discord community. On Saturdays at 11 a.m., my editor son and I take our new accounts out for a spin. We have a lot of fun hanging out and talking with our viewers. One last note, please go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and consider joining our Discord community. Okay, so let's take a look at the permanent fusion here for Lady Mikage. Now, there was a lot of debate before this actually appeared in game about what form the fusion would take and what champions would be required to be fused in order to get the mythical. Now, I had a lot of debates in comments with viewers in my videos. In my live stream, we talked about it. We talked about it in our Discord community. And a lot of players felt like it was likely that there were going to be legendary champions in this permanent fusion. And in fact, there are. I was hoping they wouldn't do it, but they have decided to do it. But they've kept it to the number that I thought was most likely the reasonable number, which is just 2 legendaries. So in the case of Lady Mikage, we need to fuse 2 epics and 2 legendaries in order to get the mythical champion. This is a step up from the Razin fusion, which, like the Bambus 4-leaf fusion here, would require 4 epics that you fuse out of 4 rares each. So this is a step up. The biggest difficulty here, I think, is not so much the legendaries as it is the fact that all of these epics are epics you have to pull from shards. You can't farm any free epics. Likewise, the rares here include 4 void rares. Again, you're going to have to pull all of these rares from shards. Now, you have the potential to pull these 2 epics up in the upper right, the final 4, the group of 4 here. So you can pull Lockwayne and you can pull Weregrin Suncursed directly from shards, thereby bypassing the need to get these rares. But still, that chance is relatively low. It can be problematic. As you can see here, this is my main. And I currently have, it looks like, 7 of the 8 rares. I don't have Trugor for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe I just have used him as food and haven't actually held on to a copy of him. And I have 7 of the 8 epics. The epic that I am missing here is Ilsinia, who I don't think I've ever pulled because I don't typically get rid of my epics unless they're fusion epics and I've needed to use them in a fusion. I should have a copy of every epic that I've ever pulled. So I've been playing over 900 days at this point, and to not have all of the epics just ready to go for this fusion feels like it could be problematic for other free-to-play players. Now, there's a caveat to that. Remember that I've been playing for a long time, and I started the game back in 2019, so a lot of these champions were not in the game. So in fact, we have one here, Firegun Isabel, who is actually a relatively recent addition to the game, and some of these other champions are also not that old. And so, these are relatively new champions, so I haven't been pulling for these champions for 2.5 years. But it still feels like if you started today with a new account and you were looking at fusing all of these champions, even if you got a little bit lucky with pulling some of these, like these 2 epics, if you pulled Lockwayne directly from a shard and you could just skip a whole bunch of rares, it still feels like it's going to be very fast if you get it in the first 4 to 6 months. That would be extremely fast, I think, to get this mythic champion and complete this fusion. I think realistically for most players, it's going to take over a year and probably somewhere around a year to a year and a half to collect all of these champions. And because it is, in fact, dependent upon RNG, the variability here is very high. You could have some players who do it in 4 months, and you could have some players who play for 4 years and never complete this fusion. I really wish that Plarium had decided on some better way they have the example of the Razin fusion, and we know how tricky that can be, right? Some people get Razin really, really early in the game, and some people just never get the champions that they need to complete him. So having some way to farm these epics or potentially acquire them in any other way outside of shards would be really helpful. My hope is that at least they'll make these champions part of 10 times events very frequently. And so you'll have an increased chance of getting these epics. But I don't feel particularly hopeful about that. I think people will have a long grind ahead of them. Now, the one perhaps saving grace is you do have a chance that I haven't mentioned of pulling the 2 legendaries, Kira the Watcher and Tatsu, directly from Ancient Shards or from Sacred Shards. So if you happen to get lucky and pull these 2 champions, or at least one of these 2 champions, relatively quickly in your account, you're going to have those champions available if and when you want to fuse Lady Mikage. Now, you do need the legendaries at 6 stars fully ascended. So the nice thing is you don't have to worry about like taking them up to 6 stars. You can just go ahead and do that. But if you're thinking long term that you may want to fuse Lady Mikage, you're not going to want to book these legendaries. You don't want to put 10 or 12 or 13 legendary tomes into a champion and then fuse it. And the reason that's really important is because even though it doesn't say it here, in the update notes, it said very distinctly, very clearly, that each of these champions will only be able to be fused once. So you cannot use this fusion, like the Razin Scarhide fusion, as a permanent source of like endless fusion champions for champion chases. All of these champions, including both of the epics and both of the legendaries and Lady Mikage, all can only be fused one time. So for some of us who get lucky with our shard pulls, Lady Mikage may be somebody who we can potentially acquire in the relatively near future. And for others of us, this may be a champion who literally we never see on our accounts in our entire raid careers. I wish it weren't the case. I wish it weren't that variable, but it is. And that's just life with Plarium in raid. Despite that, I think it's great that a lot of players will be able to get access to a really cool champion. We're not going to get a lot of mythics as free-to-play players. We just won't. Maybe you get lucky and once on your account you pull a primal shard and hit on a mythic. But I think this is much more likely to be the mythic that most players can acquire, at least over time. And I think potentially most players will acquire her, say, at least in keeping with the time frame they might get their Lydia. So she will be a late game acquisition for most players, but it's not absurd to think that you might need a year to 18 months to get a champion of this caliber. And so we come to the next question. How good is Lady Mikage? Well, let's go ahead and do a champion review. Now, I've looked at her a little bit, but we'll do what I normally do with my reviews for fusion champions, which is this is not entirely a first look, but I'm going to be deciding on my review as you're watching. So this will be my first real impression of this champion. Okay, so here we are in the index, and this is Lady Mikage. I think she's really cool looking. I do like her transformation. I think the spider transformation is very cool. It's something completely different in raid. We haven't seen a spider champion or even like a body model like this before. A lot of the models are copies and they're kind of cut and pasted onto new skins for different champions. But this is a completely new body model, and that's very cool. And I think that's true with most of the mythicals. They're creating new body models for these champions. Obviously, her standard form is probably a little bit more in keeping with what we've seen from other champions, although very cool. She's got the spider legs sticking out of her back. I don't know why she only has 6. I guess because her 2 arms count as the other 2. That would make sense. So she has 8, but then her legs make 10. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit strange. A little bit strange. You know, is she an arachnid or not? So, but still, very cool model here. Now, if we look at her base stats in her primary form or her base form, they're good stats for a support. She's at 21.6k health, 1200 attack, which is pretty high, 1200 defense, which is closer to standard, but still a little bit above average, and then 115 speed, which is very fast. She also has 20 accuracy in her kit, which is quite nice. So pretty good stats overall, impressive. Let's go ahead and check out her base forms skills. So the A1 attacks one enemy with one random ally from the Shadowkin faction. The ally joining the attack will use their default skill. That's always true. I don't know why they keep putting that text in there. Places a shield buff equal to 10% of this champion's max HP with the ally on the ally with the lowest HP for 2 turns. So the great thing about this is she's going to have a high HP pool. So anytime she uses her A1, somebody's going to be getting a decent sized shield. You know, you could have her running at 50k HP, 70k HP, even more. Really depends how you build her. But at 50k HP, you're going to be putting out a 5k shield every A1. Seems pretty solid. One of the things about powerful A1s on the Mythic champions, I think, is that their A1s are going to be used less often than other champions use their A1s, simply because they have so many skills. So they may use their A1 very infrequently. And as a result, the power of the A1 is not irrelevant, but it is maybe reduced in terms of effect, or at the very least, you're going to have to selectively activate the A1 manually in order to get the value out of it that you want. So we'll have to see how that plays out in the long run with all of these Mythic champions. Her A2 attacks all enemies. It is on a 3-turn cooldown, decreases the duration of all enemy buffs and all ally debuffs by 1 turn, and then increases the duration of all enemy buffs and all ally buffs by 1 turn. This is literally the best. This is like the best duration skill in the game in terms of anything, buffs or debuffs. Even really good legendaries typically only have 2 of these 4 effects. There are actually 5 effects here. So this is an attack. And then you decrease the duration of enemy buffs. You decrease the duration of ally debuffs. You increase the duration of enemy debuffs and increase the duration of ally buffs. So you have 5 effects here. The attack plus 4 additional effects. This is an incredibly powerful skill. It's already on a 3-turn cooldown. You do not need to book this out in order for it to get better. So that's one of the things about these champions is we're going to be looking at all of the books that you need to put into this champion. And so far, we don't need to put any books into this champion. Damage on her A1, we don't care about. She's a support champion. Damage on her A2, we don't care about. She's a support champion. And we can already build her with enough accuracy for this to basically land all the time. Now, if you do have the books and you book this skill out and get that ignore resistance of 20%, that's great. It's just going to lower your accuracy requirement and allow you to get more stats onto this champion. But realistically, I don't think we need books in the A1 or the A2 for her to be effective. Now, the A3 places an increased attack buff and increased crit damage buff on all allies for 2 turns, and then teams up with all allies to attack a single enemy. So this is a really good ally attack skill. It's on par with the best in the game. The best ally attack in the game is Cardiel's. Now, Cardiel's gives increased crit rate and increased crit damage, and then attacks with all allies. So that's very similar here. Cardiel has the additional ability of lowering the cooldown of that skill by 1 turn if the attack kills the target. So that can't happen here. So this will always be on either a 5-turn cooldown or a 4-turn cooldown if you get a book into this one. And I do think a book would be worth it here. This is an incredibly powerful skill. It's going to help you in Arena. It's going to help you in Clan Boss. It's going to help you in Doom Tower. There's no place where an ally attack that's this strong isn't good. And as somebody who has a Cardiel, let me tell you, this ally attack is going to do work for you in so many different ways, in so many different team compositions, and in so many different fights. This alone would make her a fantastic champion. Now we have the A4. It's really weird to say that. We don't typically have A4s. The A4, I guess, is her metamorph skill, so it's not really it's ability 4, not attack 4, but transforms this champion into their alternate form, then grants an extra turn. Now I want to talk about the passives for a second. At the start of this champion's turn, removes all debuffs from the ally with the highest attack. So this is a passive. Every time she gets a turn, she cleanses the ally with the highest attack. That's really nice, and that can be useful in a lot of places. But the other thing that happens here is because of this extra turn mechanic, when she transforms, she's always going to get her passive to fire. So potentially on a turn where she transforms, she gets both passives. So when she transforms, there is now a new passive. In her spider form, she has this passive. At the start of this champion's turn, decreases the turn meter of the enemy with the highest attack by 15%. So you can cleanse your highest attack champion and then decrease the turn meter of the enemy with the highest attack by 15%. I think that's how the mechanic is going to work, because if this is a real extra turn, then this passive would start at the beginning of that second turn. There's no cooldown on this passive. There's no cooldown on the other passive, I don't think. Yeah, so we don't have to worry about that. So it feels like during a turn where you transform, you're going to get both passives, and that's something to consider. That's a really powerful extra that's kind of thrown in there with that extra turn mechanic. Now, the transform, the metamorph skill, has a 4-turn cooldown, so you do have to be aware of that. You can't just flip her back and forth and get both passives every turn. But that is something to consider in terms of making tactical decisions about when to metamorph. Now, one of the really interesting things about Lady Mikage in her second form is that none of her stats change. All of the other champions that I've seen or examined, the mythical champions, all of their stats change in different forms. Because her stats don't change from form to form, you're going to have an easier time building her out and knowing exactly what stats she's going to have all of the time. Both forms are also support forms, so that role hasn't changed. She's going to do the support role a little bit differently in each form, but the build is going to be easier. The masteries are going to be easier to select. And so I think that she's relatively friendly as a mythic in that regard. And that's great because she's the one that we're all likely to get, right? She's the most likely mythic for us to acquire in this game so far. Now let's look at her skills for her alternate form here. So her A1 places a sleep debuff for 2 turns and then decreases the target's turn meter by 15%. Sleeps can be useful, especially in Sand Devil's Tower. Sometimes it can be useful in Arena. The A2 is an AoE, places a stun debuff for 1 turn, and then decreases the turn meter of all enemies by 30%. I think this may be... It's hard to say which skill is her best skill, but this is one of those skills that's going to be highly useful in a lot of places. This is going to make her a great Doom Tower champion. This is also going to make her a great dungeon champion. It's going to help you with Spider Boss. So there's so many things that this can help with. Turn meter reduction is great on a lot of bosses that allow that. So whether that's Spider, Ice Golem, Fire Knight, or Doom Tower bosses. So this is a really versatile skill, but an AoE with a 100% chance of placing a stun is a relatively rare skill. And it's on a 3-turn cooldown plus decreased turn meter. Very powerful. Here we go to the A3, Doom of Yakai. Places a 50% increase accuracy buff on all allies for 2 turns. This is on a 4-turn cooldown when booked. This also removes all buffs from all enemies and places a weaken debuff on them for 2 turns. So it's a buff strip, it's a AoE weaken, and it's an increased accuracy for all allies on a 4-turn cooldown. This is a decent skill. I think the increased accuracy is going to help. There's a lot of accuracy mechanics built into her kit. We have the increased accuracy here. Her aura is also an accuracy aura in all battles by 80. So she's going to help your other debuffers and instant effect champions land their skills as well. So if the question is, where are you going to find use for Lady Mikage? I think you're going to find use for her pretty much everywhere. If you get lucky enough to fuse her in the first 4 to 6 months of an account, she will become your account carry. You will use her in every battle, including Clan Boss, including Hydra, including Doom Tower waves, basically everywhere you can get her, probably including Iron Twins, Sand Devils, Phantom Shogun. Like, I don't imagine a fight where you wouldn't use her if you got her that early in your account. If you're a little bit unlucky and you pull her, say, somewhere after the 2-year mark, your roster may be complete and you may not need this champion in many places, but I still think you can get value, especially out of this A2 in her base form, because this is an incredibly powerful skill. It is unique to the game. There is no other champion that does all of these effects on one skill. In terms of books, there are clearly 2 or 3 skills that you would like to get books on, but if you counted up all of her books total, there aren't that many. 1 here, that's 3. We're up to 4. None on the passive, so we're at 4. And then we've got 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 1 on the passive here is 10. And you could probably get away with as few as 5 books. So somewhere between 5 books and 10 books is what you're going to need on Lady Mikage. Those might be a little bit tricky to acquire for free-to-play players. But like I said, if you can get just, maybe start off with whatever books you can get and start dropping them into her skills. And if you get lucky, hitting the right skills might allow you to save some books there and get a lot of value out of her early on. Before I go, just one last note I wanted to make about her A1 in her base form. This attacks one enemy with one random ally from the Shadowkin faction. If you run her in a composition that only has one Shadowkin faction ally, you can know who it is going to join her ally attack every single time. So if you put her in a clan boss with a ninja, or if you run her in a Hydra team with Burn Giri, or somebody who has like a provoke or a decreased attack or a poison or, an AoE on their A1, you know what you're going to get. Obviously, in faction crypts, you're always going to get an ally to join. But as long as you have one Shadowkin in her compositions anywhere, this A1 is going to add that additional effect. And so in that case, again, this A1 is fairly strong. And you may want to consider how often you use this skill because of that additional ally attack. Okay, so that is it for Lady Mikage, a really good champion who I think could provide a lot of value. But as a free-to-play player, I am a little bit worried about my ability to ever complete this fusion. I'm hopeful that maybe I can get there in the relatively near future. I only need a few champions, but you never know. You never know if you're going to get those drops or not, and it could be another 6 months or year before I get my Lady Mikage. If anybody out there already has all of your champions lined up, definitely let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear what your plan is. Are you going to go and hold on to those other legendaries? Are you going to run up all the way to the mythic? Are you going to build her out? And where do you think you're going to get the most value out of her? And anybody else, if you're frustrated by the random nature of this fusion, you could also let me know in the comments below. We can commiserate together, because I really wish PlayerMan had come up with a better plan here. But I guess a free mythic is a free mythic. And if it takes a while to get, that just underscores the value of the power of these champions. What can I say? All right, that's it for me. Thanks so much for hanging out. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I've been Colred, and I will see you in another video soon.